Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. That said, this is a video that Path of Exile 1 players will find useful potentially as well, because what we're talking about here is crafting theory, not the ins and outs of exactly how you do things, although when we do discuss that, we'll be talking about it in Path of Exile 2 examples. Instead, we're going to be talking about some of the underlying theory. Some of this is going to make a lot of sense and you're already doing it without thinking about it, but if you do have this in your mind, I think you'll find it's useful when you're designing your own crafts, especially when you want something that's a little bit more complex. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably aware that there are RNG elements to pretty much everything in Path of Exile 1 and 2 crafting. This video is about rigging those odds in your favor, or even rigging them so far in your favor that things that are not intended to be deterministic become deterministic. That's the foundation of isolation crafting. Also, I did a written version of this guide as well, so if you prefer the written version, I'll put a link to it down in the description below. It's going to have the same content as the video version, except for one thing, and that is that I've been working on a side project, and I'm going to mention that at the end of this video, but it's not up on the Mobalytics write-up. The concept of isolation crafting is a crafting philosophy where you force the game to add a mod to an item, but you take away the option for anything that you don't want to be added to be rolled. You rig the odds in your favor so that when that 1 in 12 dice is rolled, it ends up that 11 out of the 12 of them are banned. That is your goal here. Now, both the written and the video version of this guide were written during patch 0.3.0 of Path of Exile 2, and all examples are going to be for that particular version of that particular game. But the general principles will apply in the future, even if these specific examples that I give don't work in future versions of the game. Additionally, the tactics we're going to talk about here are things that you can use to audit a craft. If someone that you highly respect put up a guide for crafting a particular wand way back in 3.22 in Path of Exile 1, you want to know whether it still works, one of the things you can then do is have a look for any isolation crafting steps they've used and see if those steps still work, or if there's been game changes that render them ineffective. I will just also mention that I am assuming a little bit of knowledge here about the way that item modifiers work. So you'll need to understand what prefixes are, what suffixes are, how many prefixes, how many suffixes an individual item can have. That is somewhat of a prerequisite to get anything at all out of this video. So I want to start with the simplest example imaginable. And whilst I'm using a Path of Exile 2 example here, you could do exactly the same thing in Path of Exile 1. Imagine you've got this amulet or something reasonably similar over in Path of Exile 1. You've got an amulet that has 2 modifiers on it. It's rare, and one of those modifiers is fractured on. What's going to happen if you slap this thing with an Orb of Annulment? Well, there are 2 modifiers. It's normally a 50-50 call as to which of the 2 gets picked, but one of these modifiers is completely and utterly banned. And that means that you can deterministically predict exactly what that amulet is going to end up looking like after it's been annulled. You've taken an intrinsically high RNG crafting process, the use of an Orb of Annulment on an item, and you've stripped away all of the different layers of randomness so that you can absolutely deterministically guarantee what you're going to get. That is a fundamental example of what isolation crafting looks like. This is not necessarily the most useful example in the real world. So let's break down exactly why this works. The game insists that 1 modifier be removed from the item. There are 2 mods, and so by default it's a 50-50 pick, but the chance to remove the spirit modifier is entirely removed from the equation because it is a fractured modifier and therefore is immune to being altered by pretty much anything in the game. And so we go from having 2 equal chance options to just 1 option. And isolation crafting is just all about taking this simple case further. It's a process of setting up a craft so that at every possible step, or at least all but the first steps, there are absolutely no RNG elements involved. So let's take a more complicated example, and this time we are going to be looking at things that are Path of Exile 2 exclusive. We're going to be imagining that we're using the Omen of Homogenizing Exaltation. So this rigs an Exalted Orb, or a Greater Exalt, or a Perfect Exalt, and in practice it mostly rigs Perfect Exalts because its Omen is very strong, and therefore you want to use it in the best way possible. And the next Exalted Orb that you use on an item when this is turned on will add a modifier of the same type as an existing modifier that is already on the item. And this is the list of everything that can roll on amulets in Path of Exile 2 as of patch 0.3.0. Again, this is going to be very different if you're either playing Path of Exile 1 or you're playing POE2 at some undetermined point in the future. There's actually not a lot of collisions between certain modifiers. For example, there are only 2 that have the drop tag, percentage increased rarity of items found prefix, and exactly the same stat but as a suffix. These are the only 2 that are drop tagged. What about caster tagged? Here, there's increased spell damage percent, there is cast speed, and there is also +1, 2, or 3 to the level of all spell skills, which is arguably one of the very, very best things you can possibly get on an amulet in Path of Exile 2. So I want you to imagine now that you've got an amulet in Path of Exile 2 that has ranges, which is tier 1 accuracy prefix, and Countess tier 1 spirit prefix, and they're both on the same item, but there are absolutely no other mods on it. Well, spirit has absolutely no tags on it, so remember that. And then when it comes to the accuracy mod, it is attack tagged. The only other thing that is attack tagged, and actually doesn't show in this screenshot, is plus to the level of all melee skills. So what then happens if we rig the results of our next Exalted Orb through the use of an Omen of Homogenizing Exaltation? In this situation, all possible modifiers that don't have the attack tag are absolutely and utterly banned from rolling. And this leaves 3 possibilities as to what can roll. Note that this is also going to ban every single prefix, just leaving 3 suffixes. These are of combat, +1 to the level of all melee skills, of dueling, +2 to the level of all melee skills, and of battle, +3 to the level of all melee skills. Now these 3 are not equal in rarity. It's estimated that the ratio of getting them is 10 to 5 to 2. So you get 10 of combats for every 5 of dueling for every 2 of battle. So you could apply this homogenizing exaltation with a classic Exalted Orb, and in that case, you'd have a 2 in 17 chance of getting exactly what you want, which is the hotly desired of battle. But if you use a perfect Exalt here, you also ban level 5 and level 41 mods. Everything that's 49 and down is banned unless it is the top tier for that particular mod category. What that means is that your perfect Exalted Orb is absolutely positively guaranteed to hit the of battle suffix. The game is forcing the orb to add a mod. That's not something that can be avoided. And we've rigged the odds in our favor. We've isolated the mod we want, we've banned everything else that could have rolled, and so the game is forced to give us exactly what we want. Another couple of examples here, and again, keep in mind this is 0.3.0, so hopefully if you're watching this in 0.4.0 or later, you pay attention to some of these principles, and then you go and verify yourself whether they still work. One of the simplest examples I can think of involves the left side Annul. Omen of Sinistral Annulment, these things are expensive, these things are crazy rare, much rarer than the Omens of Homogenizing Exaltation, one of the most powerful crafting tools in all of Path of Exile 2. What they do, they rig the next Orb of Annulment so it is absolutely banned from removing suffix modifiers from an item. It will always hit a prefix instead. Now I want you to imagine you've got an item that's got very, very good suffixes on it. It's got a single fractured prefix on it, and it's got one other mod on it. This Omen is going to ban the Orb of Annulment from hitting all 3 of the suffixes on the item. But then on top of that, the fractured status of the item bans one of the 2 prefixes from being rolled by the Orb of Annulment as well. And so you end up in this situation where you've got an RNG process. There's 5 things it can hit, but 4 of them are banned. What's going to happen? It's got to hit the 5th one. And ultimately, that's isolation crafting. It's a strategy for removing the RNG from crafts. As I say, it's probably something you've been doing yourself already to some extent, but it's something that's worth explicitly thinking about when you're trying to design a craft, because if you're thinking about it when you're designing a craft, you'll come up with other options as to ways that you can use it. Perhaps, for instance, you can find a way to achieve isolation crafting using a much less popular Omen than the Omen of Sinistral Annulment. Maybe you can find a way to make one of the relatively common Omens end up achieving much the same goal for you. Anyways, so this is the point in a video where I would normally say, may your Varlorbs have interesting results, and say, catch you around, have fun, whatever. Well, enter my little side obsession. Today, I'm going to announce what I've been working on for a while as a bit of a side project, mostly during the period where 020 was underperforming expectations in Path of Exile 2, but it's also something that's been on the back burner in my mind for a little while. It's a science fantasy lit RPG web serial by the name of Archangels of Phobos. And whilst I'm going to avoid any major spoilers here, it is something that's set in the near future after a mission to Mars, or more specifically Mars's moon Phobos, ends up uncovering something that probably should have remained buried forever. Now undoubtedly some of you have come across other works in the lit RPG genre, such as Dungeon Crawler Carl. Book 5 of this is the best thing I've read in the 2020s so far. But for those of you that haven't, it's fiction that runs somewhat on video game logic in some way, shape or form, and the characters are to some degree aware of this, which differs it from something like a tabletop RPG Let's Play. I'm going for a science fantasy feel here, so there is room for both modern day technology, alongside of course things that are much more fantasy oriented as well. Anyways, this is something that I have been working on for a while. It's not in a state where I can say, hey, I've got a whole book to sell you or anything along those lines. Instead, it's going to be released as a web serial. And depending upon how busy Path of Exile is at the particular time, I'm going to aim for 3 chapters a week when Path of Exile's in a quiet period, and I'm going to aim for 1 or 2 when it's in a busier period. I also have a little bit of a backlog, so I'm still working out exactly how many I want to release at the start. It's kind of awkward because I've done a few things out of order while I've been getting started with it. Anyways, that's my side project. I figured you'd be interested in it if you'd stuck around after the end of the video. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results.